And the cardiovascular system is really important. This is what involves your heart and how blood is pumped throughout the body to allow you to do everyday tasks, survive. You couldn't survive without a heart and blood and oxygen. So this is really important. Okay, we're going to talk about the anatomy of the heart. There may be some major parts of the heart that you would possibly need to know, but we won't need to just like label a picture or anything like that on the test. We're going to talk about how the heartbeat is regulated. Okay, maybe you've heard of somebody having an irregular heartbeat and what that means. We're going to talk about blood pressure. You've probably all had your blood pressure taken before when you've gone to the doctor's office. And then what are some common cardiovascular diseases and how might you prevent them? Okay, so the cardiovascular system includes our heart and all of our blood vessels. Okay, the blood vessels just means where the blood can be found. Okay, so you have blood vessels throughout your body that help transport blood and oxygen to allow for you to walk up the stairs, type on your computer. All of those functions require blood and oxygen. It brings nutrients to the cells and helps get rid of waste. So when you are eating food, drinking water, all of those things, your blood system is how that gets kind of transported throughout your body. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that works in a little bit here. Blood is refreshed in the lungs and kidneys, intestine, and liver. Okay, we're thankful for this because when blood gets pumped to our extremities and you take a deep breath in, you're taking in oxygen that is going to those extremities to help with the movement, the nutrients, all those things. When you exhale carbon dioxide, our blood comes back into our heart and it's not oxygen rich, it's oxygen poor. And it has carbon dioxide in it, but we go back to the lungs to get some more oxygen and then we pump it back to the rest of the body. Our kidneys, liver, intestine, we're really thankful for that. Especially if you like spent a weekend, you know, indulging too much, you can fill in the blank there. Aren't you so glad that you can recover from that, whatever that may be, right? Your lungs, kidneys, intestines, liver, that's how our blood is refreshed to help us kind of continue to, like I said, live and survive. That's our main goal for our body. The lymphatic vessels help this system by collecting the excess fluid surrounding these tissues and returning it to the cardiovascular system as well. So maybe you've had swollen lymph nodes. Those are that little, the organ, the gland that's kind of under your neck. Can't really see it because I'm wearing a mask, but sometimes when you have like a sore throat, strep throat, or you're sick, you could maybe have swollen lymph nodes. The swollen, it just has excess fluid. That fluid is because your body is trying to fight off a foreign substance, maybe a virus or a bacteria. And then eventually, hopefully your swollen lymph nodes goes down, right? You don't just walk around all day with, you know, every day of your life with swollen lymph nodes, I hope not. And it goes down and your body's able to kind of collect that excess fluid of fighting off certain infections and things like that. And it brings it to that cardiovascular system where it kind of gets essentially flushed out of your system. Okay, so we know that the cardiovascular system, it involves your respiratory system. So we do have blood that goes to the lungs to get oxygenated. So our respiratory system has a little bit to do with our blood in our cardiovascular system, right? If you're working out really hard, you're running, you're walking, whatever it is, and you know, you start to kind of get a little bit heavier breath going, it's just the blood and your oxygen levels that want to be transported to those extremities, and that's why your respiratory system is really important for that. Some of the tissue cells, you have your digestive system that also is dealing with the cardiovascular system. Remember when it's like your liver, it helps detoxify. Your digestive system helps you to digest food and spread out the nutrients and expel the waste. And also your urinary system is connected to that cardiovascular system. There's also a good representation of, like, you guys maybe have an idea of what a heart looks like, right? We'll definitely look at a pig heart on Wednesday, and it'll be really cool. You guys will get to dissect that. It's one of the, I always say that it's one of the favorite labs, but usually people find a lab that they like and hands-on. We're going to dissect a pig heart. You'll be able to see the different parts a little bit better. And then you have all these like kind of branch-like lines that are going throughout the body. Those are the blood vessels. There are main arteries and veins. We're going to talk about the importance of the color and the location here in a little bit. The functions of the cardiovascular system, it's important for transportation, protection, and regulation. Okay, it transports carbon dioxide, oxygen, nutrients, waste, and hormones throughout our body. Okay, so let's give an example of each of those. Oxygen, when you take a deep breath in, you're inhaling oxygen. It goes to your lungs and your respiratory system, but the blood from your heart, it then goes to the lungs to get oxygenated, and then it comes back into your heart, and your heart kind of pumps it to the rest of your body so that you can continue to walk to class. Okay, carbon dioxide is what you exhale. There's some carbon dioxide out there. And that carbon dioxide is a product that is made from the process in which the oxygen is used in our body. Other waste products, such as things that you eat or drink that your body doesn't need. Nutrients, thinking about like maybe you had a banana this morning for breakfast or an orange. It has some vitamin C in it. We're so thankful that when we eat it, our body just kind of takes care of the rest, right? Our body takes all those nutrients from those healthy foods that we eat and gives the nutrients to our body and to our muscles and our organs. And then hormones are also transported in the blood system. Think about like maybe one time when you were stressed. Okay, there's different hormones that are involved with stress. You could also think of like sex hormones. You could think of adrenaline, your fight or flight hormones. They're all transported throughout your body in the blood system and to kind of create the function in which those hormones are trying to accomplish. Remember, hormones are proteins. It's also used for protection. So the cells of the immune system are transported to help to protect the body from infection. Okay, it's kind of like a mainstream way of how our body attacks foreign substances being germs, bacteria, viruses, things like that, that could harm our body. Our blood system kind of can see or identify a foreign substance and either fight it off or expel it from our body. And then regulation is maintaining homeostasis in body conditions. So maybe you're too hot. Your blood system can actually help identify as well as our sensory receptors to understand that we're just too hot, we're going to start sweating. Okay, it'll also dilate or expand our blood vessels that'll help with the conserving that homeostasis. Maybe you're too cold. Maybe you're walking outside without a coat today. What happens is you start to shiver and shake, and maybe you kind of tense up like this, but what's actually happening with our blood vessels is they may constrict a little bit and try to be more efficient in those ways. It's not good for a long period of time, but it's important for maintaining homeostasis because our body just wants to survive at a certain temperature and pump blood to our extremities, okay? This is the main pathway of blood in the body. Yeah.
So what happens if like someone gets
Hypothermia?
hypothermia?
The body is too cold for too long, most likely. Or that's a general way of saying it. So hypothermia, eventually your heart is having to work to maintain that internal body temperature because we want to be at 98.6 as best as possible, right? That fluctuates throughout the day. And when you have hypothermia, your body and your heart is working a little bit too hard to maintain that internal body temperature, that it can have some adverse effects. So the main thing is that your heart is working too hard for what it's trying to do. Yeah, so that's a little bit about hypothermia. It can affect your skin. It can affect, the way that your body is resting and digesting food and things like that too. Okay, so heart, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, and back to the heart. All right, this is kind of an important understanding, so we're going to walk through it together. I don't know if I have a red marker. I think I only have orange. Orange will do. Okay, so you have your heart. No, your heart does not look like this, but for the example today, we'll just do it like this, okay? You have your heart, and we would like to pump blood to our extremities, and the way that we can do that is through our arteries and veins. You've maybe heard of arteries and veins before. So our heart, we pump blood in through our superior and inferior vena cava. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. And what happens then is it goes through the different chambers of our heart. We pump blood to our arteries. Okay, and the way that I remember this is that you can go look at a piece of art. Like you can look at a painting on a wall or a statue. That's what it means when you use an artery, it's going away from your heart. And if it's going away from your heart, it's most likely oxygen rich because we want to transport that oxygen to the rest of the body. Okay, our arterioles, let me try to spell it right, are then the connection between our capillaries. Our capillaries, which I'll show you guys a picture of here in a little bit. Make sure I spell everything right. Okay, so it's a process that repeats itself. This is then back to the heart. So you have your heart, it pumps blood to your arteries, to your arterioles, to your capillaries, venules, veins. Back to your heart, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins. Veins, if anybody's seen the movie How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, she sings the song, You're So Vain. You probably think the song is about you. So when somebody is vain, they're very like self-centered, self-conceited, kind of in a negative way. But for this example, veins means that you're pumping blood towards your heart. That's kind of how you can remember the difference between veins and arteries. Remember, you can go look at a piece of art, so you're pumping blood away from the heart. Veins pumping blood to your heart. Okay. Then we have these things called venules and arterioles. They're kind of these smaller versions of arteries and veins that are connected to the capillaries. And your capillaries, which I wish I had a couple of different colors markers, but it's kind of this web-like branching that allows for the exchange of gases. This is how the oxygen and carbon dioxide leave and go into your blood system. So like this is how we kind of get rid of that oxygen that goes to your muscles that you can, walk down the stairs, but also how we kind of gain carbon dioxide from that in order to kind of pump it back through, expel it through the respiratory system. You just expelled carbon dioxide and we just keep doing it over and over again, okay? Arteries and arterioles are very similar. Veins and venules are very similar. It's kind of this web-like, smaller version to get to the capillaries. Okay, this is just a brief overview. We're definitely going to get into more detail here in a little bit, which will help your understanding. Okay, so the first one is the arteries and the arterioles. Arteries carry blood away from the heart, which is what we're showing in that picture on the board here. Their walls have 3 layers. They have a thin inner epithelium. Epithelium is a type of tissue, if you remember epithelial tissue. They have a thick, smooth muscle layer. Smooth muscle, remember, is the type of tissue that is involuntary. That's the stuff that your kind of body does to move things along without you consciously telling it to do so. If I wanted to pick up this marker, I had to tell myself to pick up the marker. But if I'm trying to digest food, I don't have to walk my body through and tell it how to digest my food. Okay, so it's made up of a thin epithelium wall, a thick, smooth muscle layer. That smooth muscle layer allows for the blood to move along, and then other connective tissue. So that's the tissues that are made up of the arteries, which is the word on the right there. The arterioles are the small arteries that regulate blood pressure, which, like I said, they're related to the arteries, those arterioles. They help regulate blood pressure, and they help connect us to the capillaries. The capillaries are microscopic vessels between the arterioles and the venules, which is right there. My picture's not that great. There's a better picture coming up in the next slide here. They're made of one layer of epithelial tissue. They're quite thin. They form beds, or like kind of like a nest, like a bird's nest of vessels where exchange with body cells occurs. This is the exchange of body cells that allow for like oxygen, waste, things like that to be kind of transported throughout the body. It's combined with a large surface area. So that's why we have a small, they're small, they're web-like because of the surface area in which they can cover. Okay, so this slide here is showing the capillaries. So let me walk you through it here just a second, okay? The capillaries, let me see if it has it. This is kind of like a zoomed in view of the capillary bed. It kind of looks like a leaf if you ever, took like a plant class in high school, middle school, elementary school. When you look closely at a leaf, it has this branch-like substance. It has some webbing, maybe a couple of thicker channels. This is a capillary bed. This is also known as the capillary bed. And we have our veins and arteries. Our veins are going to be that dark blue color, and our arteries are going to be red in color. Okay, the color is really important. Okay, so we have arteries. They'll be red in most of our pictures, and your veins will be like a bluish purple color. Okay, this is important. There's two reasons why they do that. One, if they were to put a black and white picture up here with no labels, you couldn't really tell much about which one is a vein and which one is an artery. The other reason is because in real life, your arteries are bright red because they are oxygen rich, meaning that they have a lot of oxygen in them, which is great so it can get to your extremities. It's bright in color. The other way we can kind of conceptualize this is that when you go look at a piece of art, it can be pretty bright, right? It could be pretty inspiring. That's kind of how I think of arteries being bright red. Your veins are oxygen poor, meaning that they don't really have any oxygen. There's a little bit. They're darker in color, which if you look at most of your, well, depends on who you are. But for me, I can see through my pretty transparent skin here that I have some blue veins on my hand. Or if you've ever had to get an IV on your hand before, they put it into a vein, okay? Those are going to be that darker blue in color. You can't really see your arteries as well because of where they're located in the body, which they're more superior, lower in your body, kind of behind a lot of the organs, as well as they're not as superficial, like meaning they're on the surface. Okay, so you have a vein here, artery here. That's another picture right there. The reason we can tell the difference, two reasons. Color is red and blue. Arteries are red, veins are blue. Also, you can look at the size a little bit of the wall and what they're made of, okay? So here we have blood flowing away from the heart through the arteries, and it comes back, here we go. So the blood flows through the arteries to the capillary bed. This is the arterioles, this is the venules, okay? So your blood is going through here, arterial, capillary bed, venules, vein, back to the heart. Okay, here in our artery, we have some elastic tissue. We have an endothelium and a smooth muscle. It's kind of thicker in a sense, okay? The reason that the arteries are thicker is because they have to pump blood to the rest of the body. Now veins, they're pretty big. That's why I can see them on my skin, but they are thinner and a little bit more flexible, okay? And we'll see this on Wednesday too when we look at the aorta, which is a part of the heart, the thick chamber wall on the top, and how that's really important. So the couple of things you can take from this slide, the colors, right? Arteries are red, veins are blue. We can kind of see how the capillaries are involved with the veins and the arteries. You can tell it's a capillary because it's kind of that purpley color in the middle. We can also tell the difference between an artery and vein by their size. So arteries have a thicker wall of smooth muscle, where veins are a thinner, more flexible wall. So let's talk more about those veins and venules. The venules are the small veins that receive blood from the capillaries, which is true, right? I drew that over here. Capillaries to venules, all right? The venule and the vein walls have 3 layers. They have a thin inner epithelium, which is similar to arteries. They have a smooth muscle layer, which is close to the arteries as well. And they have an outer connective tissue. And then the veins carry blood towards the heart. Remember, if you are someone who is vain, you're thinking only about yourself, so it's going to the heart. Veins that carry blood against the gravity of the heart valves to keep blood flow towards the heart. So there are some ways that your body can pump blood against gravity. We'll think about it 2 ways, right? Where's your heart located to your brain, right? Your brain needs to get some blood. So your arteries can go in this direction, right? Against gravity, all right? Your veins have to do the same thing. Most of my extremities are lower than my heart. So when I'm done using the oxygen, the veins have to go in the opposite direction against gravity to get that blood into your heart again. So they have the capability to do that. Okay, here's this picture again. How can you tell the difference between an artery and a vein? We talked about this, right? We have the size. Arteries have a thick wall. Veins, they may be a little bit bigger. They're a little bit more flexible wall. The color, the red artery versus the blue vein, all right, and maybe the direction in which the blood is flowing, or whether it's oxygen rich or oxygen poor. So we're going to talk about the anatomy of the heart, and sometimes this is kind of hard to conceptualize when you just put it in words. So I'm going to go back to this slide, and let's just look at a picture first. And then we'll go back and kind of give it some conceptual words. Okay, this helps all those visual learners out there. Okay, this is the external anatomy of the heart. This means that if you were to look at a heart that was in a live person, you would see this. Okay, it's not cut open. This is the external anatomy, what we can see on the outside of the heart. Okay, a couple of really important things and landmarks that I'd like you to notice first. Okay. The blue and the red matter here, okay? We just talked about that. Veins pump blood to the heart. This is a vein, this is a vein, this is a vein, and so is that back there. Arteries pump blood away from the heart. This is an artery, and so is that over there, okay? So you got your main part of the heart. Down here it's called the apex, which almost looks like my name, but it's not my name, APEX. Which is kind of this like point at which the heart comes to at the bottom. You have your inferior vena cava and your superior vena cava right here. And what those do is they start the whole process essentially. Although the process is like cyclical, it comes back on itself. The superior and inferior vena cavas bring the blood to the heart to start the process on the inside. The word inferior and superior matter. Like if you have a boss at work, your superior, your boss at work, that's somebody who's above you. That means that your superior vena cava is going to be on top. Your inferior vena cava is on the bottom. Inferior, superior. Okay? The word vena kind of looks like the word vein, which is true. It's a vein. It's pumping blood to the heart. Okay? Some of the other ones that I'd like you guys to know is the aorta. Here's the aorta. You maybe heard of the aorta before. It's very structured. It's big. It has a thick wall. And this is because the aorta pumps blood to the rest of the body. Okay? The aorta is pretty important right here. This is just called the aortic arch. You guys don't need to know those 3 pieces up there. Just know that this is the aorta. Most of the hearts that we'll dissect on Wednesday will be cut right here. So you may not even be able to see it. Okay? you have a couple of other things. Knowing the difference between the right and the left of the heart is also really important. When you guys are looking at this picture, this is your left side and this is your right side, correct? Everybody's got the same directions that I do, okay? But in real life, you have to think of it in anatomical view. Anatomical view means anatomy view, like when somebody takes anatomy and physiology and learns about the parts of the body. Anatomical view means it's as if it's in my body right now. Okay, so this is my right hand, even though over here this is your guys' right hand. So this is the right side of the heart. Okay, which makes sense because right here it says right pulmonary vein, right pulmonary artery. You guys see that? Where's the right ventricle? Yeah, right ventricle. Where's the right atrium right here. And then you have the left atrium over here, left ventricle over here. You see how it's backwards? That's kind of hard to understand for someone who's just starting to learn about this. Just think, as if it's in your body, this is my right hand, where's the heart? Where is the right and left? Okay, so that's a little brief intro on that. So let's talk about what these bullet points said on the previous slide. So the large muscular organ consisting of mostly cardiac tissue is called the myocardium. Okay, that's that big muscular organ part of the heart. It's surrounded by a sac called the pericardium. We may not be able to see that in our dissection on Wednesday, but just kind of some facts about that. It consists of two sides, a right and a left, and it's separated by a septum. Okay, so let's go back really quick. Let's look at that. All right, so remember the right and the left? It's separated by a septum, which they don't have it labeled here. Do they have it on a different? Oh yeah, the next slide has it labeled. So here's the septum down here. Can you guys see my mouse moving? That's the septum. And this is what separates the right and left, this middle part right here. Okay, here's that apex down here that we talked about that looks like my name. This is going to be the right side. This is going to be the left side. Okay. It consists of 4 chambers. The chambers are the atriums and the ventricles. Okay, so we have a right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Okay. So essentially we've got a heart. It's gonna look a little bit like that. Okay, it's still a heart, right? You've got this septum that kind of cuts down the middle. This is that apex. Okay, and the chambers are kind of broken up like this. Remember, this is going to be the right side, and this is going to be the left side. It has to be as if it's in that person's body. This is the 4 chambers, all right? This is your right atrium. This is your right ventricle. This is your left atrium. And your left ventricle. So when that bullet point says you have 2 atriums and 2 ventricles, 2 atriums, 2 ventricles. They're titled by right and left. Okay. You have 2 sets of valves. You have the semilunar valve and the atrioventricular valves. The valves produce that lub-dub sound of the heart. They kind of act like a dam system, kind of. That lub-dub is the closing of those valves so the blood doesn't go in the opposite direction. Because we don't want our veins to pump blood away from the heart. We don't want our arteries to pump blood to the heart. So that lub-dub of the valves is kind of like a protection so that the blood doesn't go in the opposite direction. And then when you guys listen to a heartbeat or a stethoscope, you hear that lub-dub, lub-dub. With your heartbeat, that's those valves that are shutting and opening. Okay, now let's look at the internal anatomy of the heart. So essentially what happened from the external is that we made a cut from the frontal part here. So now we kind of cut it in half like this to look what's in the middle. Okay, this is what it looks like on the inside. So we still have that aorta, we still have the superior vena cava, you still have your inferior vena cava, all right? Your superior vena cava, it brings blood into the heart, into your your right atrium. Here's your right atrium, right, my right hand, right atrium. It then goes through your atrioventricular valve. It's also known as the tricuspid valve, and we'll see that on Wednesday. It does have 3 parts to it. Tricuspid valve. So we go superior vena cava, right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle. There will be somewhat of a pattern to this. So let's talk about that process together. Okay. Okay, so your blood comes in through your superior and inferior vena cava. The reason why there's 2 is because some of it comes from above your heart and some of it comes from below your heart. We're bringing that blood into your heart. We then go to your left. Oh, why do I keep saying left? That's not correct. You're going to your right atrium. We go to your tricuspid valve. Okay, there's some other parts of the middle that we're talking about in a little bit, but then we go to your right ventricle. This is how blood is going through the body, through the heart specifically, okay? The way to remember this is there will be another step on the other side of the heart. We go atrium, valve, ventricle, and the way to remember that is A comes before V in the alphabet. So atrium becomes first, and it has to go through a valve before it goes to the ventricle. Oops. And then we're going to what does it want us to say? We go to the pulmonary trunk. Okay, we haven't talked about that pulmonary trunk yet. The pulmonary trunk is over here on your right side, over here. This pulmonary trunk is going to use the pulmonary artery first. And it wants to go gain some oxygen. So we're going to go from the pulmonary artery. You guys can follow along. We're going to go back in the opposite direction here. We're going to go to the lungs. After the lungs, we go to the pulmonary vein. Okay, this is, remember, arteries pump away. Here we gain oxygen. And then we're going to pump blood towards the heart. All right, so far what we've done is we go in through the superior vena cava, we go right atrium, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, pulmonary arteries, which you can't really see, they're right here. We go to the lungs, which could be way over here on either side. We go back in through the pulmonary veins, which is right here, which then dumps into the left atrium. And we have a similar pattern to right here. So left atrium, we go bicuspid valve. Which is also on this slide right here called the atrioventricular bicuspid valve. Right here. And then we go to the left ventricle. From the left ventricle, which is down here, we then get shot up through the aorta. Which has it's big, it has a thick wall because it pumps blood to the rest of the body. And after that, our blood gets pumped in through the superior and inferior vena cava. So I know that maybe some of you don't have a great angle on this right now because I wrote it kind of way back here in the corner. I'll leave it up if you want to take a picture of it here in a little bit. So that's kind of the process of how blood is pumped through the body, and to give you some context with a picture. Okay, so let's do it one more time together. You have your superior and your inferior vena cavas, these blue kind of cords here. They go into the right atrium, tricuspid valve, 1, 2, 3, right ventricle, pulmonary arteries, lungs, pulmonary vein, left atrium, bicuspid valve, 1, 2, left ventricle, aorta. Repeat. Okay, that's just a little bit about that. If you're more of a word person, here it is. Okay, this is your way to learn. Inferior superior vena cava. Step 1, it dumps blood in that right atrium. So far we're correct. Right ventricle, they missed the tricuspid valve, which is okay. 2 pulmonary arteries. So we go to the pulmonary trunk, which is the pulmonary artery, which then goes to the lungs, where blood is oxygenated. It goes to the pulmonary veins. It goes to the left atrium, number 7 there, goes bicuspid valve, left ventricle. It then is pumped out through the aorta, number 9, to the rest of the body, and eventually is pumped back into the inferior and superior vena cava. I'm just going to say body right here. So you guys know that it gets pumped from the body to the rest of the heart. And it repeats itself over and over and over. And we're very thankful for that. This is how you can visualize the flow of blood through the heart. Again, it's that same picture. The things that are cool about this slide is you can see those intercalculated discs, which we talked about with the cardiac muscle tissue. And here's a cardiac muscle cell. But this picture is very similar to the internal anatomy of the heart. Okay, this slide is talking about how let's see here. All right, this is talking about how the structure of the vessels match the function of the heart. So the left ventricle is much more muscular than the right ventricle because it pumps blood to the rest of the body. And we can see that over here. This part right here that's very muscular, hopefully you can see my mouse moving on here. This muscular part of the left ventricle is very muscular because it has to pump blood to the rest of the body. It's got to shoot up through that aorta. So this part right here is very muscular. And that's also a way, when we go to look at the anatomy of the heart on Wednesday, how you can tell the difference between right and left when you're trying to figure out what you're looking at. The left side is going to be really muscular. The arteries are more muscular than veins. We talked about that. They have that thicker muscular wall to withstand the higher pressure exerted on them. So the aorta has to pump the blood to the rest of your body, to your brain, to your toes, to your fingers. So it needs to have a muscular wall that's pretty able to do that. The veins have a thinner wall and a larger center to contain the blood in that way. So that's how the structure and the function is related to each other and how we can tell the difference between the two. how a heartbeat occurs. The two words here that are in red are called systole and diastole. The systole is when the atria contract together, followed by the ventricles contracting together. And the diastole is that rest phase, when the chambers relax. So that lub-dub, relax, lub-dub, relax. If we were to listen to a heartbeat, maybe you have before, that lub-dub is the systole, that rest is the diastole. So systole, lub-dub, diastole, rest. The cardiac cycle or heartbeat occurs about 70 times per minute on average. All right, so why don't we pull out, well, I guess I'll give a stopwatch. And what I'd like you to do, if you'd like to participate, you don't have to, is you can put your fingers on your wrist and try and feel your heartbeat, or you can go underneath your neck. We're gonna check your resting heart rate. I'm gonna go for 15 seconds. You're gonna just count how many times you feel your heartbeat. And then after the 15 seconds, you'll take that times what you got by 4. So 4 times what you're going to count. And that'll be your beats per minute. It'll be resting beats per minute. Beats per minute. Hopefully you guys have all kind of somewhat relaxed now that you haven't walked in about 20 to 40 minutes. All right, so if you'd like to participate, try and find your heartbeat and start counting in 3, 2, 1, count. Time. Okay, so whatever that number you got, I don't know what that was, take it times 4, and that is your resting beats per minute, right? Because 15 times 4 is 60 seconds. All right, another way to do that would be to count them all for that 60 seconds, but this is just a sped up way to do that. And that's your average right now beats per minute. Okay, when you get up to go walk out of the classroom, your beats per minute will probably increase by like 20 to 30, depending on how brisk you're walking. Like when I'm walking, I'll have like a 90 beats per minute, 80 beats per minute, maybe even a 100 if I'm walking pretty fast. If I'm working out really hard, my beats per minute would be up in maybe the 150s, 160s, 170s. You've maybe also heard of like what your max heart rate is, and there's ways to figure that out. It's never entirely accurate. You're supposed to take 220 minus your age. To figure out your max heart rate. But there's obviously there's a lot more that goes into that than this. My dad always jokes, so obviously my dad is older than me, so you can just kind of guess his age. And he can get his max heart rate similar to what I can get my max heart rate at, which is odd, right? Because what other things that can go into this effect is biological gender. It can go into how in shape you are. It can go with how big your heart is. It can go with your height, your weight, all of those things. This is just a general sense of your max heart rate, okay? Most people want to figure out what their max heart rate is, so when they, eventually want to maybe work out or something like that, they know what is kind of in that danger zone. And sometimes it's good to get your heart into that max heart rate and then allow for some rest. It allows your body to kind of work itself in that way. Does anybody want to share what they got for their resting beats per minute? You got 20? So you got 20 right here. So you took 20 times 4. Yeah, and what'd you get? About 80? Yeah, perfect. That's about that's a good resting heartbeat. It's about 70 is what they say is average. So if you're either side of that, give or take, remember average just means that it's kind of the middle ground. Good. Anybody else want to share? Yeah.
I got 88.
88? Yeah, perfect. And it can increase and decrease for different reasons. So if you just had lunch about an hour ago, even though you're sitting down, you've been sitting for an hour, your heart rate may be a little bit more increased because your body is resting and digesting food at the moment, even though you don't really feel like out of breath or anything like that, right? Most elite athletes like marathon runners, cross-country runners, they'll have a really low resting heart rate, resting beats per minute. It can get down to like the 50s because their body has been trained to work very efficiently for a long period of time. Not necessarily good or bad in either way. Average is about 70, right? Good job. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so what is the cardiac cycle? That's kind of what we went through right here, where we work together. This is just another visualization. I'm not going to walk through this slide again, but it's a good one to reference back to if you'd like to study. It's essentially just what I wrote back up here on the board, and you can follow through that on your own. Okay, how is the heartbeat controlled? Okay, there's a couple of different ways that that heartbeat is controlled. We have some internal controls, like that's happening on the inside of the heart, and then we have some external controls that are kind of controlling it on the external side, like maybe some hormones or things like that. But let's talk about the internal control first. Your SA node in the right atrium, this is also called your SA node. I guess I could write that up here for you. Which is located in the right atrium. Okay, that makes sense so far. It initiates the heartbeat and causes the atria to contract. Okay, you've ever had like a plastic water bottle and you squeeze one side of it, the water can kind of shoot up the other side. Or if any of you had those like little, I'm gonna maybe date myself here, those little toys when you were a kid that had like slime on the inside and it was like that fluid plastic and you could squeeze it on one side and the little like sparkles in the middle. You guys kind of know what I'm talking about? So essentially the atrium is contracting here. So what's going to happen is it's going to push the blood in the other direction. This impulse reaches the AV node, which is located in the right, also located in the right atrium. That's sent down to the AV bundle, the Purkinje fibers, that causes a ventricular contraction. So it's contracting our ventricle, a ventricular contraction. So essentially, this node controlled the heartbeat, it initiated it, and it contracted here so that it has a ventricular contraction. So essentially what a contraction is like a squeeze or like a pulse. Like when you think of somebody who's like in labor who's having contractions, what's happening is that there's like a squeezing and a releasing. And then these impulses travel between the gap junctions. We know what gap junctions are. It's how those intercalculated discs are put together, which we talked about how cells are joined up together, gap junctions. And that's how it can be essentially regulated on the inside. So our nodes, those SA node, the AV node, those are the nodes that are controlling the internal heartbeat, how we can control it on the inside. This one's a little bit easier to conceptualize for some people because the external control of the heartbeat can be from your brain or hormones, such as epinephrine or norepinephrine, okay? Like maybe you went outside and somebody door dinged your car. That's the worst feeling, right? You don't know who did it. They probably didn't know that they did it. You're a little upset, right? You're upset that they door dinged your car. You're going to have some kind of hormones that are released that are going to kind of initiate that stress feeling. And maybe when you start to get a little stressed, your heart rate increases. All right. This is an external control of your heart. Okay. It's that fight or flight, right? If you feel threatened in a situation and you like ran out of that situation, that's your fight or flight. Those hormones are regulating your heartbeat. It allows you to essentially fight or get out of that situation that is threatening your body, because your body's main goal is to live and survive and pump blood. Okay, so this is that external control, things that are on the outside of the heart that can cause the heart to beat. It could be your brain, all right? You could be thinking about something and your heart rate increases. Maybe you're nervous. Okay, it can be hormones such as epinephrine and norepinephrine, like your adrenaline rush. Right, you're nervous about something, you got a big game coming up, and that's your heart starts to race a little bit. That's your epinephrine and norepinephrine hormones that are controlling the external beat of your heart. All right, you have that SA node and that AV node. I'll put them both here. They're located in the right atrium. All right, there are those yellow kind of circles here on the diagram. And these are the ones that kind of start initiating that internal control of that heartbeat. Okay, we talked about gap junctions before. We've seen this picture before. Gap junctions are how the intercalculated discs are put together. Okay, intercalculated discs are what's unique to this type of tissue. We talked a little bit about that on Friday. Okay, the ECG, you've maybe had an ECG before or you've seen an ECG. This is a recording of an electrical charge that's in the heart muscle during a cardiac cycle. So during this cardiac cycle, there's an electrical pulse that is going. You've maybe heard of it before or seen it like on a TV show where it's like beep, beep. You know what I'm talking about? You don't want it to go beep. That's not good, right? But that the waves of the electrical signal are a way to measure what a regular heartbeat looks like. For us, we call this an ECG, and that's that picture on the right there that looks like a graph. It has different peaks on that graph that are important. People who have like irregular heartbeats would maybe have a peak that's less tall here, or maybe they have two back-to-back big peaks. Okay, this is an ECG. The different waves or parts of this peak are kind of easy to remember if you remember your alphabet. It's P, Q, R, S, T, kind of in the order of the alphabet. So it starts with a P wave. It goes Q, R, S, T, and that's that ECG. So let's go back to this slide, okay? This is a recording of the electrical charges and changes in the heart muscle during a cardiac cycle. The atria produce an electrical current called a P wave. So here in the atrium, we have a P wave, okay? This P wave is simulated by the AV node. The contraction of the ventricles in the QRS, so it's P, QRS, that is happening in the ventricles here. The recovery of the ventricles is called the T wave, P, QRS, T, and then looking at the electrical changes allows doctors to understand if there's any abnormalities. Here's that picture again. So it's P, QRS, T. This is in the atrium, ventricles, and then it rests. If there's an abnormality in the heartbeat, this is how doctors would determine that. We're all familiar with blood pressure because we've had our blood pressure taken before when you've been to a doctor's office or a nurse. And the blood pressure is important because it can measure the pressure against a blood vessel wall, and it's usually measured in an artery of an arm. So like when you go get your blood pressure taken, nowadays they have machines, maybe you've all been connected to one of those machines before, and it kind of goes on your bicep of your arm. That highest number is called your systolic pressure. This is the blood ejection from the heart. So if you have a blood pressure of 120/80, that bigger number on top is called that systolic pressure. And the lowest pressure is called your diastolic pressure, and that occurs when the ventricles relax. So you've maybe had a blood pressure before of 120/80. That's considered average or normal. Remember, it's systolic over diastolic. It's controlled by the arteries, okay? There's a picture here on the next slide of what it looks like to get your blood pressure taken. You have that inflatable rubber cuff that goes on your arm. All right, sometimes a doctor will put a stethoscope kind of right on your elbow area and listen to the heartbeat, listening for that lub-dub and what that sounds like. When there's no sound, that means that the arteries are closed. So you can kind of see that here on the top right of the picture. The systole is when the sounds heard of the artery opening. The diastole is also no sound, and that's when the artery is open. So it's lub dub, rest. Systole, diastole, that's where those numbers are coming from. Okay? So when somebody says, oh, you have a blood pressure of 120/80, and then they just walk away and you're like, oh my gosh, is that normal? Am I okay? Is everything okay? I don't know anything. Yes, that's normal. Blood pressure can also change throughout the day, but it can change for a couple of reasons. If you've had a lot of caffeine that day, that can change, right? If you had an over average amount of caffeine, if you eat a lot of fat, greasy food, a lot, your blood pressure can increase, okay? There's also thing that's having too low of a blood pressure, meaning that your heart isn't working hard enough. So if there's a number that's different, say you went to the doctor and they said you had a 135/90, okay, that's probably fairly normal. They also call it white coat syndrome, when you also can be a little bit nervous when you go to the doctor's office for them to take your blood pressure in the first place, and then you get a higher blood pressure because you're nervous. White coat syndrome, okay? So yes, blood pressure is important. Sometimes I wouldn't take every single blood pressure and like just run with it. Be like, oh my gosh, I have, hypertension. You maybe don't. Over time, if you have the same blood pressure and it still seems to be high, that's when it would be an issue. But sometimes it's just you get a higher blood pressure when you go to the doctor because, like I said, you're nervous or you were doing a lot that day or things like that. Your blood pressure can change all throughout the day as well. Okay? Here's that word that I just said. I said hypertension. Hypertension is when you start to have a high blood pressure. As you can see, like this 140, 159 kind of area. Normal is when you're below a 120 and below an 80. So if you have a 119/79, that's still considered normal. Okay? A hypotension is when it's too low, and that's when you go below a 95 and below a 50 on those. Okay? Pre-hypertension is that 120 to 139, and you'd be surprised how much your blood pressure can change throughout the day in that range and not be considered pre-hypertension. And then you have stage 1 and stage 2 of hypertension. As we go down that table, it gets more and more dangerous. This is where hypertensive crisis, where emergency care may be needed, is when you're like higher than a 180 and higher than 110. That's just a good reference to remember back when somebody takes your blood pressure, to whether or not it's going to, be an issue or not. So what is important about blood flow? Blood flow is under the highest pressure in the arteries, but remember, it has that thick muscular wall. And then blood flows slower through the capillaries, which is important to allow for the exchange of gases in the middle, in that orange part right there. And then blood pressure is minimum in the veins and venules, but blood flow increases. Okay, so what does that mean? The first bullet point is saying that the pressure is the highest in the arteries. I think of it like if you're at a water park and you're sitting in a tube, and picture like a big water slide tube has a thick wall. That's going to be the artery. And they just shoot some water through there and you're like falling through on the tube and you're having a great time. Okay, that one would be that high blood pressure of the arteries because of that thick muscular wall. It's a structured slide. It's safe. You can go through that. Okay, then you get down to the end of the slide and they probably put you into like a little pool to like slow you down. You come down to the end of the pool, into the water, and it's like this pool. That would be the capillaries, right? They kind of like, you're still moving along. They have to get the next people down the slide next, but the capillaries, it's important to allow for that exchange of gas and cells between the capillaries. And then you have to carry your tube back up to the top of the slide because that's the worst part. And your blood pressure is minimal in the veins and venules, but blood flow increases. Okay, so you're going back up to the top of the water slide, and you're carrying your tube, and you're really excited, so you like ran up the stairs. Okay, so that's kind of what's going on here. Okay, think of it like a water slide at a water park. The reason that blood flow pressure is the highest in the arteries is because we've got to pump it to the rest of the body. We've got oxygen-rich blood, we got to pump it out. Capillaries is slow, so we can exchange those gases and nutrients. And then the blood pressure is minimal in the veins and venules, but the blood flow increases. So the pressure on your veins is not a lot. Remember, it's a kind of a bigger space, but the blood flow can increase because of the bigger space. Okay, here's a little bit of that visualization. This graph is showing the blood flow starting from the heart. So this is blood flow over time. This is relative magnitude, or essentially like how much force is needed. Here's the velocity and the blood pressure of the arteries, the arterioles, the capillaries, the venules, and the veins. As you can see, it kind of starts to go down a little bit, okay? The velocity, though, goes up and then down. This is the total cross-section area of the vesicles, or the vessels, in here. So it kind of goes up and down. It looks like a bell-shaped curve, if you've ever heard of a bell-shaped curve before. Okay, so this picture is showing how skeletal muscles can contract and help with our breathing. So if blood pressure is so low in the veins, why does the blood flow increase? Okay, so that was a couple of slides ago. Last one here. Blood pressure is minimum in the veins. The pressure on the veins is low, it's minimum, but the flow increases. We want to know how that happens. So let's talk about that. First of all, they have skeletal muscles that are contracting. You're breathing and you have valves, okay? So here, the first picture, A, is a contracted skeletal muscle that's pushing the blood past an open valve. So because these muscles are contracting, it's kind of squeezing it down. The reason it can squeeze it right here is because that vein is so thin and flexible. Remember, the arteries have that thick muscular wall. Veins are a little bit more flexible. They have a little bit more bend to them. But those skeletal muscles, like your calf muscles, your arm muscles, all those are going to contract. You're breathing. We squeeze it through this part here, and then that closed valve prevents the blood flowing backwards right here. So we push open that valve right here because we push the blood through, and then those valves lock back down so that your blood can't flow in the opposite direction, which is good. So the reasons that the veins, the blood flow increases is because of that skeletal muscle contraction, the flexibility of the valves being able to open here at the top, and the breathing. So like when you're breathing, it's helping that blood flow throughout the body. Okay. These are two cardiovascular pathways. We don't really focus on them too much, but what I would like you to remember from these is that the right side of the heart brings the blood from the body to the lungs, which makes sense, right? Right to the lungs. The systemic circuit is the left side of the heart that brings the blood to the entire body and delivers nutrients and gets rid of waste. It essentially divides this process in half and calls one half the pulmonary circuit and the other the systemic circuit. All right, here's just the major arteries and veins of the systemic circuit. Remember, the systemic circuit is the second half. What you can see here is the color that matters. You can see the red and the blue. Remember, reds are arteries, veins are blue, and they're kind of labeled for you. We don't have to memorize this picture by any means. I teach anatomy and physiology at Hawkeye, and they have to memorize this type of picture. Some of the words that you've maybe heard before is your common iliac vein, your abdominal aorta, which is this big part down here in the middle, your common carotid artery, your internal jugular vein, all of those these are just different types of veins and arteries in your body. You don't need to memorize this picture, just maybe need to reference back to it if there's a question. Your coronary circulation are small coronary arteries that supply blood to the heart. They are separate from the systemic and the pulmonary pathways of the body. That's not super important, but that's okay that that's in there. All right. the hepatic portal system. We don't really talk about that much. But what I would like to talk about is this picture right here. This is the exchange of the capillary beds, and it's a primary result of osmotic and blood pressure, okay? So here we have arterioles and venules, which is right here, arterioles and venules. This is a capillary bed, okay? This is where the water, the nutrients, the gas is exchanged from your blood into the rest of the body, okay? And the reason that this changes is because of the osmotic and blood pressure. And the way to look at this picture is that the osmotic pressure are the green arrows here, and the blood pressure are the red arrows. So here you have high blood pressure, meaning that the pressure on the walls right here is super high. Your osmotic pressure, or the pressure of water, is low. You see how this arrow is bigger than this arrow? See how the two arrows are different sizes. Then as you move down, osmotic pressure increases and blood pressure decreases. You can see that this arrow is big and this arrow is small. So as we go down, the water pressure, the osmotic pressure is higher than the blood pressure. And here, at the beginning, the blood pressure is higher than the osmotic pressure. That change in the pressure allows for the gases and the nutrients to go out through those capillaries to get to the oxygen to your extremities, to get water to your extremities, all those different things. This exchange in the capillaries, the lymphatic capillary beds lie alongside the capillary beds, and they look like this. They're those green, kind of grayish green branches in the middle. Okay, these are how they take up excess fluid and become lymph. We talked about your lymph nodes and how they could be swollen. It returns the lymph to the cardiovascular veins in the chest. And the precapillary sphincters can shut down a blood capillary, and then blood flows through the shunt. We don't worry about that, but what you do need to maybe know is that the difference between here, so we've got the arterial and the venule. We've got this capillary bed in the middle, and you've got the lymphatic capillary and the capillary duct. You've got a blood capillary. It kind of looks like a big mess, tangly thing. It's got high surface area, which is good for exchanging of gases and water and things like that. And it's important for nutrients and waste. Okay, so why does, the cardiovascular system, why is it important? Well, cardiovascular disease is kind of one of the most common causes of death in the Western world. It's pretty important. So understanding why this happens and how we can prevent it is pretty important. There's some disorders of the blood vessels. We talked about hypertension and high blood pressure on that table, that blue table. You can have osteosclerosis, a stroke, a heart attack, or an aneurysm. These are different disorders of the blood vessels that can cause to injury or death. Hypertension is the first one. This is when you have high blood pressure, and it results when the blood moves through the blood vessels at a rate higher than normal, and it really affects the heart. It's kind of called like a silent killer, because people can kind of just go about their day. Their body is used to making those corrections all the time, but what happens is your heart is working harder than it has to. This is when you have a blood pressure of 140/90 or higher. That's considered hypertension. Like I said, it's called a silent killer because there are very few symptoms beforehand, but then it can lead to a heart attack, stroke, or kidney failure. So a heart attack is when like a major blood vessel constricts the blood that is getting to your heart. A stroke is when the blood cannot reach your brain to a certain extent. And a kidney failure, your kidney is kind of in your abdominal cavity, kind of towards the back. And this allows for kind of the detoxing of your urinary system and things like that. Helps with your urinary system. And if you have hypertension, it can really kind of fail that system. I always butcher how to say this. Osteosclerosis, I think I did it all right, is built up of plaque in the blood vessels. It can also lead to a stroke, a heart attack, or an aneurysm. Essentially, think of it like a roadblock when you're on the road, maybe there's some construction or an accident. This plaque is stationary and it's called thrombus. And when it embowels, when it detaches and can move to distant sites. So I believe, yeah, there's a picture on the next slide here. This is essentially that roadblock of plaque. It starts to build up. The plaque can build up from high cholesterol. It essentially, remember your heart's main goal is to pump blood and get your extremities oxygenated. And if there's a roadblock, it's going to have to work a little bit harder. Think about the detours you maybe have to take because there's construction on the road ahead and you have to turn left and turn left again and then turn right and then finally you're back on the main road. You have to work a little bit harder. You got to use a little bit more gas to get where you're going. That's essentially what an osteosclerosis is. It's that plaque buildup. That picture on the right there is just like an in real life picture of that plaque. This middle picture is just a cartoon. A stroke we talked about is known as a CVA or a cerebrovascular accident, which is when the cranial artery is blocked or burst. Remember that picture with the body and different main arteries? That cranial artery, it goes to your brain. It's when part of the brain dies due to lack of oxygen. Your brain needs constant oxygen even when you're sleeping and not thinking about anything, or even if you're staring off into space, your brain still needs oxygen. And this is when the blood is not getting oxygen to the brain. Symptoms may include numbness of the hands, feet, difficulty in speaking, inability to see in one eye. So luckily for us in humans, our brain has two parts to it. It's the reason why I can raise one hand and lower one hand. Or if any of you have ever tried to like tap your head and rub your stomach at the same time, you're able to tell different parts of your body to do different things at the same time, okay? This is also seen when you have a stroke. Now, the right side of my body is controlled by the left side of my brain, and the right side of my brain is controlling the left side of my body. So if somebody's having difficulty speaking, a doctor who's an expert, not of my level, somebody way above me, could figure out what part of the brain the stroke has affected. Numbness in the hands of the feet, you probably would only feel it on one side. An inability to see in one eye would mean that it's affecting only one side of your brain. So that can be fairly interesting. A heart attack seems to be fairly common. My 96-year-old grandma has had a heart attack. She's had 4 bypass surgery. She's 96, and that was like 15 years ago, so that was pretty cool. A heart attack is known as a myocardial infarction, which is where part of the heart dies due to lack of oxygen. So now you're having a heart attack because there's not oxygen getting to your heart. This can be a pain that radiates down the left arm due to blockage of the coronary artery. Okay, so any of the main arteries and veins, if there's a blockage, a burst, or oxygen is not getting there, that's when you would have a heart attack. And by you, I mean the hypothetical person. An aneurysm is a ballooning of the blood vessel. So think of like when you blow up a hot air balloon and the balloon kind of blows up. That's kind of what's happening here. This is where osteoporosis and hypertension can weaken a blood vessel and cause ballooning. This is most commonly affected in the abdominal artery or in the arteries leading to the brain because those are really important arteries. So what happens is the blood vessels in osteosclerosis, where that plaque buildup, or hypertension, where the blood is just working so hard on those blood vessels that the aneurysm happens because that blood vessel is increasing. It kind of blows up like a balloon. It can lead to a burst, which is not very good, but that ballooning can affect breathing. It can cause a heart attack or anything like that, and strokes as well. So how are disorders of the blood vessels treated? We talked about all these depressing diseases, but how do people go about combating those? First one here is dissolving blood clots. This TPA is a drug that dissolves blood clots. So somebody who maybe has a history of a heart attack, like my grandma, or somebody who has hypertension or osteosclerosis may take a blood thinner or something like a TPA that dissolves blood clots, because the clots are unwanted. Sometimes we want clots in our body, right? You get a paper cut on your hand and the blood gets clotted so that you don't just continue to bleed for the rest of the day. That's important. But sometimes blood clots happen when you're not expecting them, and they, kind of are essentially a roadblock in your way of trying to get blood to your extremities and to your oxygen, and to get oxygen to your extremities. So that's one way. Another way is treating the clogged arteries, okay? Bypass surgery. Bypass surgery is essentially taking a vein from a leg and using it to kind of bypass where that clot is happening. So my grandma had 4 bypass surgery, I think. I'm gonna ask her later today. I think it was 4. Okay, so she had a clogged artery of some sort, okay, that was probably cutting off the supply of blood to her heart, okay? What a bypass surgery does is it takes a vein from your leg and essentially makes like a bridge or like a detour that allows the blood to flow around it, okay? It works. It can be a little bit harder to recover from, essentially because your body has to get used to working in that way. Stents are wire mesh cylinder inserted into a clogged artery to hold it open. So a stent would happen, we would put kind of like some mesh wiring here and here to help kind of open up that artery in a sense. We also have an angioplasty. This is a tube with a balloon inserted into the clogged artery, and when inflated, it opens that blood vessel. This is the opposite of the aneurysm we were talking about. Remember, an aneurysm is when the blood vessel balloons. This is where we want to kind of put like a balloon in there to break up that plaque, open up that blood vessel to allow the blood to flow normally. And a stent and an angioplasty may be used in combination. So maybe they use a balloon to open up they use an angioplasty to open up that vessel, and then they use a stent to kind of keep it open with a mesh wiring system. Okay, here's just a picture of how that may happen with a stent and an inflated balloon down here. Here's kind of like what it would look like in a doctor's office where that doctor is manipulating the instruments. The movable arms are holding the instruments. Yes, it's like a robot. The TV screen shows the operation in process, where they insert that inflated balloon here and that mesh wiring stent, essentially to kind of break up that plaque, open up that blood vessel. Remember, our blood vessel just wants to get that blood to our heart and to our extremities. Disorders of the heart, such as heart failure, is when the heart is no longer beating properly. Some treatments, some people have had like a pacemaker put in, if you've ever heard of a pacemaker. This is allowing that blood to continue to pump regularly. This is when there's a left ventricular assist device, or an LVAD, a heart transplant, either natural or artificial. Here's a picture of an artificial heart transplant. So essentially, these are like the left and the right atriums and ventricles, and it's an electrical signal that allows for the body to continue to pump blood artificially. So there's like an internal wireless driver and a rechargeable internal battery, etc. on that. So the main question is, how can we prevent all of those things? How can we prevent a stroke, a heart attack, all these heart diseases? The use of tobacco products and preventing the use of tobacco products is important because of the effects it can have on the lungs. And when your lungs are working a little bit harder, it kind of affects the chain of events here, as you can see. Drug and alcohol abuse. Abuse is the word here, where they're not used properly. Obesity and a sedentary lifestyle. It's just really important to, be active, whether that means going for a walk or, doing some sort of exercise like yoga, or maybe you go for a run, or maybe you play badminton or pickleball or anything like that. It's important to just stay active and move your body, because obesity and being too overweight can affect the way that your body is moving. It can affect how hard your heart has to work. Stress. I know if I knew how to reduce stress, I'd let you know. But essentially, it's different for everybody, but stress can, cause some heart diseases if there's too much stress, or if there's too much stress on the heart over time. Also, poor dental hygiene. So cleaning the plaque off your teeth, making regular dentist appointments if possible, and brushing your teeth daily can also help with plaque and not having that build up in your arteries and veins. Does anybody have any questions over the material today? All right. Well, you do have an assignment over chapter 5.
Isn't due till Friday.
Correct. Here we go. All right, your chapter 4 assignment is due tonight at 11:55. Chapter 5 is due on Friday. Thank you so much.